This video I will show you how to get started building website with Flask. Flask is a Python framework for making front-end and back-end code. To get started, I've already started up some files here. I have an app.py made. It's empty. There's nothing here. I have an env, which is where you would put your environment variables that you want hidden. I have git ignore here, and for git ignore I recommend adding virtual environment to it, your .env, your potential PyCache, stuff like that. And then to just get started, I recommend starting up a virtual environment. So you would do Python 3 -m venv, and this will build a virtual environment directory which has a ton of different standard libraries for Python. And then you need to activate the virtual environment. bin/activate. On Windows you'd probably most likely use you would use something like scripts/bin/activate. Okay, so this website, it's going to be a simple thing where we use Bootstrap for CSS styling, and we'll bring in a form. So we're going to have a form where we enter a color, and the color is going to alter a state. So in Flask you can have a state similar to the JavaScript frameworks such as React, where you have state. And I'm going to show you how to use a G variable and sessions to have a state that you can share across different routes in your website. So in order to get the Flask server started up, we have to import the libraries for it. So what I recommend is, I have notes for it here. We're just going to copy and paste this. So these are the libraries we're going to use. We're going to use Flask, python.env, and the forms library. And then I think what I want to bring in is the Bootstrap. So there's different ways you can bring in Bootstrap. You could bring it in using a CDN, which is another term for like an HTTP link, where you're gonna bring in the CSS through your links on your root HTML file, but we're just gonna bring it in as a static file with a lot of CSS. So I'm going to actually drag and drop some of the CSS I already have, and I'm going to paste it into the static folder here. Okay, so this will be the min bootstrap CSS that we'll use. Then our templates folder is empty. This is where we're going to put HTML files. By the way, this is all standard. This is standard for Flask, is to always have a static directory, a templates directory. So we'll call one file base.html, and we're going to make a index.html, and we're going to make a new.html. So we're going to have 3 HTML files. And in order to initiate an HTML file, the classic way of doing it is ! tab. That's how you'll get started up there. So for here, we're going to bring in our style sheet. And our href will be, we have this thing called, getting ahead of myself here, but different ways of doing this, but we'll bring in the style sheet, right? And our style sheet, remember, is here, bootstrap.min.css. Okay, so far we don't have a whole lot of stuff here, but we can definitely speed it along by copying and pasting some things. So I'm going to copy and paste how we're going to do our first 3 lines of initiating our thing here, our app. And it's interesting that my Python interpreter is working now. My Python, you could call it IntelliSense, has not been working for like 3 months, but now it just suddenly started working. Okay. And then we're going to copy and paste the name in main. This will run. And so far we haven't named our app variable, so the app is pretty critical. This is the variable that our application is running on. Let's see. So I have here from forms.forms import all. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to abstract some of your code out to another directory, because it's just better code quality and it'll help you build out larger programs so you don't have things as cluttered. So to get started with that, I'm going to do make dir forms, right? And we're going to touch forms/forms.py. So this is where we're just going to put one object, class object here, which will be our form. And I'm actually going to copy and paste that code for that. Okay, so we just have one class here called color form, and it's going to have a string. So a user is just going to type in a color such as green, red, or blue. And we're going to have a submit field, which is another way of saying a button. Okay, and then we're going to, this is a module, so we have to do the init.py, right? And then here, so we're bringing in Flask. Okay, so far this looks good. Now another critical file we need is config.py, right? So config is short for, configuration. This is a configuration, like this is where we're going to bring in our environment variables. And the most important environment variable is a thing called secret key, which is what Flask needs for your CRF token, something like that. From operating system, we're going to import environ and path. From .env, we're going to import a function called load_.env. Remember, we installed the Python package .env. We're going to import OS, and OS is an operating system package that comes standard with all Python. And again, I'm going to copy and paste in boilerplate here. Remember, this is all very standard stuff. So this is how we're going to load variables from our .env file. And then we're going to have a class here where we define a variable called secret key, and we're going to get secret key from here. And here's where we're going to declare an environment variable called secret key. Now this is an important part. So we have to generate a key. So we could just do something like this, right? We could just generate a random key. But I'll show you a more fun way of doing it, where we exploit. Here I'm going to copy and paste this, where we exploit our Python engine, right? So you can open a terminal and get your Python REPL going. We could copy and paste that stuff and enter. See, and Python program just generated a secret key for us. We'll copy and paste that into here. Cool, so now we have a secret key generated. And our secret key has to be loaded into our Flask program. So I'll go ahead and say app.config, configure from object, and it's in our config file, right? And the class was called config. Alright, so we're getting there. So now we need a little bit more stuff. Just going over my notes here. Oh yeah, one thing that's good for deployment reasons and just convention is to generate your requirements.txt. So what does that mean? That means we run a function pip3 freeze. Hopefully you can see this. It's at the bottom of the screen here. Right arrow requirements.txt. And this generates a file that shows us all the packages that we imported. So far this looks right. Jinja is what we're going to use in HTML to help import some variables from Python and do some logic inside of HTML. And I think the first thing I want to do, speaking of HTML, is start bringing in the code that we need for HTML. Alright, so on the topic of Jinja. Okay, so what we're going to have is we're going to have content. So this is base, right? This is our root HTML. And we're going to have other files such as index and new that extend from here, right? And so we use this to declare, right? These are blocks of space where we're going to have other HTML being extended. So we would have another file where we do this. We use the word extends base.html, right? We end it with, I think this is right, if I remember right how to do it. And our index file will look like such and such. Yeah, I'm going to give it a block file, right? So the title of this index.html will be select color. I actually got a little confused for a second here. All right, we have to say down here, yeah, block content. Okay. So you can somewhat ignore this because you don't necessarily need this, but for general practices, you'll have an HTML file that extends your base, and then you'll have your block content, and in here you'll have more HTML, right? So you can do like HTML here, right? And this will work. I'm going to uncomment this. So since we're using Bootstrap uses words such as like container and flex and mt-2 and form-group. It has all its special class names to bring in your CSS. So I'm not really going to write any CSS. I'm just going to exploit the fact that I can use these utility classes from Bootstrap. So I would do something like this, where I write div, right? Class equals container. And when you use something like class equals container, that means this div will have some general, I think by default I guess it's block, display block, but it's not gonna really overflow, and it's gonna fit well inside its parent. So the stuff will look good when you make your window size larger and smaller, such as something as small as like a cell phone screen. So it's important to have some sort of CSS strategy, whether it's Bootstrap or Tailwind or just your own CSS. Just gonna make another div here. And let's start bringing in some of the code to make our form page. So to do that, I'm tempted to just copy and paste stuff. Okay, so this is a form, right? We're gonna have a form here. It's gonna be a post request. It's gonna go to our root page, our normal page. And see these things here, these form.color, form. So what this is working with is here. It's working with, actually I messed this up. It's working with this, Flask forms, right? So this is all very integrated, where we brought in the WTF Flask form library, and that stuff, see color and submit here, see that stuff is going to work nicely with this here. And then in here I added some Bootstrap stuff here. And what's interesting, and I wish somebody could solve this for me, is my editor is showing me that there's an error here. And this is not really an error. It looks bad, but this will work and this will make sense a little bit later. But this is what the boilerplate for our index.html will look like. Okay, back to the app website so we can bring in code to make this work. So this will be our home page code. It will accept GET requests and POST requests. It's going to show a form here, color form. This is where a user will type in a color. When a user types in a color, our thing called g.color will equal what the user submits, right? Form.color.data. And then we use this Flask function called render template. So when you do render template, or in particular return render template, it makes it so that this function here will return one of our templates, such as index.html, and it will bring with it these variables, form and color. You can think of these as like key value pairs. So you have form, which is a key, and its value will be form, right? This is the value. We'll have another key called color, and the value will be g.color. So what is this G thing? And this is something I've been working with for a while. And in order to understand G, let's group this together with session. Right? G and session are similar in that these are, think of these as like dictionaries or namespaces. You could think of it something like that. This is where you can store global like key value pairs, things that can be used throughout your web application, so somebody can navigate to all different kinds of routes in your program on your website, and it's going to share these variables across all of them. So it is quite powerful, and it's useful for having a good flow to what you're doing, and so you can display all kinds of information across many different views. So I'm going to show you some utility stuff here. Okay, so I have this decorator here at app.beforeRequest. So I forget the exact way of describing it. I could pull up the documentation, but think of it just like before these functions, before these app.routes are executed, it's going to execute a function such as this one before request. And this is where we're going to set g.color, right? We're going to have a g.pointer called color, and that's going to equal by default red, right? So g.color will equal whatever it is, else it'll just equal red. And this is a little bit extra, but I have some other stuff here where in the case that the g.color is white, what we're going to do is we're going to store a thing called store in session, right? We're going to have a key value parent session called store, and that will equal true. So this will make more sense once I get it running. And just to show you a little bit more about how Flask works, is I have this other function here called after request. So you can run a function after every request. I like doing stuff like this, like just print OK, right? Just to show that it's worth running. So this is something like a callback, similar to JavaScript, where things are happening, right? There's a thing called response, right? So our Flask application is always making responses, and this is basically a function that runs moving forward through the life cycle of a get request or post request. Okay, so I wonder if this will actually run as is right now. By the way, down here we have debug equals true. So what that means is, I think this is what it means, is that when you save changes, so we'll start up the server, and so when you save changes, it's gonna auto reboot the changes you made. So I'm gonna save all here. And let's see what happens if we run. What happens if we run this? Okay, so it says it's running on our development server. So by default, it's going to run it on port 5000. Just as a note, in production, I'm going to write this down. You will want to run on port 8080. So that's just a side note. But in development, we're going to be on port 5000. Oop, we already have an error. So I had some sort of typo somewhere. I think I found the bug I have. I forgot a quote mark there. So let's save all these changes. Let's see what happens. And I still have a mistake in my thing here. Page here. Let's fix that. Color form, right? Cool, so now we have our home page for our website. So our G variable, it starts off with red, right? So this text color is red, and this is just a placeholder here, red. So let's see what happens when we type in the word green. We submit. And you see how our letter changes color. Pink. Right. So you can see here how this is similar to, you can say we're updating the state, right? So this is how with Flask you can update state of stuff so you can interact with the website and cause changes here, right? So we type in white and it disappears because the color was changed to white. So I have a button here called Other Page, and that's what we're going to set up now. So this other page will go to our function called New. Down here we're going to make a function called New. This will be another route. Right? Methods will equal get, and by the way, default method for an app route is get, so you don't necessarily need this, but FYI. Def new, and now this is where I'm going to bring in my boilerplate code. Excuse me if the logic here doesn't make a whole lot of sense, especially if you're new to Python. So we're going to name a variable called data, and we're going to say it equals true. And if our session, by the way, this is similar to cookies, right? So you might be familiar with browser cookies. So it's a way of storing user data. So if our session object has a key called store, our data will be okay. So it starts off as true, but then it's going to be okay if store exists. We're going to render a template for new.html, which we of course don't really have quite yet, but it's going to be a short, small file. I'm going to paste it in here. So this will extend base.html, and it's simply going to display data, a simple string. And let's just save all of this and check out our website again, refresh. So let's type in a color such as black. We'll submit it. Go to our other page. And that did not work. Why is that? New, right? Alright, let's rerun this again. I keep messing up today. Alright, type in a color such as green. Submit. Okay. So when we go to this new route, this data variable is default true, right? It's going to be true. But if we submit white, right? If we submit the color white, right? Well, that didn't exactly do what I was thinking of. Why is that? So if we move our g.color and our session control flow here down into our after request function, we can see how that works here by refreshing. So if we type in black here, again, we'll see the state of this wording here to be black again. If we type in white, we expect it to disappear. We go to other page and we see it says okay, right? Now this is a bug I have here, and I've dealt with it before in the past. This is why Flask is tricky, and you have to play around with these at after and at before, and there's different ways to use your session. Like you can do a session file system. So if I click back here, right, if I navigate back, it's going to give us this annoying confirm form resubmission. We can just refresh the page. And remember, if we type in red here, or like green, yeah, it's not really behaving the way I see. This is where the control flow is not good here. lfg.color does not equal white, right? Wonder what would happen if we just do session.clear. What would happen? So if we type in black, submit, that's interesting, it's not working. Yeah, this should be, session.clear should be somewhere else. It should be down, I think, here. Alright, let's see how this works. So we type in blue here, right? Okay, that works. So this will say true. If we say white, it'll go back to okay. Okay, that works good. So when we type in white, we should get the word okay. If we type black, yeah, we'll get true. So yeah, this is what I was thinking of how we should do it. So yeah, that was an introduction I gave to how to start up a Flask program with Bootstrap styling. So I mean, here we didn't really write a whole lot of CSS. We certainly didn't really create our own CSS file. We just copied and pasted the Bootstrap from the Bootstrap docs. And I showed how to bring in environment variables so you can hide stuff and ignore it from GitHub, and how to bring in your environment variables, how to import logic into your app.py. So I think all this is important to getting started with building a Flask application, so you can build a website like I did, or an API, anything really. So yeah, if you want more content similar to this, just like, subscribe, and happy coding.